October 1969, Central Highlands, South Vietnam. The rain began before sunrise and never took a breath. It came gentle at first, light enough to hear through the trees, then hardened into a steady curtain that erased the ridgelines and turned the clay road to blood-colored sludge. The air carried that thick scent of soaked earth and burnt fuel that always seemed to hang over convoys too long on the road. 10 trucks sat idle along the narrow stretch east of Pleiku, 8 cargo carriers and 2 gun trucks, lined like metal beasts waiting for a command that hadn't yet arrived. Steam rose from the engines, headlights slicing weakly through fog that glowed pale against the jungle. I was convoy commander that morning, clipboard wrapped in plastic, boats half sunk in the mud beside the lead gun truck. The engine's warmth pressed through my fatigues. Down the slope, the creek hissed under the rainfall, black and restless. The locals called it Black Creek, though on the map it was just a faint blue vein. The radio hissed, then cracked to life with a voice too calm for the weather. Move at first light, take the spur road, cross at Black Creek. That was the first mistake. Before we continue, hit that subscribe button. It helps the channel grow. I've been running supply lines up and down I-4 for weeks without a real night's sleep. Every trip a toss between flooded roads and old minefields. This one was supposed to be simple: deliver fuel, ammunition, and sealed crates marked Camo Repair to a forward base near Dak To. 12 hours out and back, no scheduled stops. The map showed 2 routes, both trouble. QL-19 was cratered from airstrikes, so command offered us a shortcut, a dirt spur carved along a creek bed and bending west again toward the mountains. They said ARVN guides would meet us at the turnoff. None showed. We waited 20 minutes, then another 15. When I tried to reach battalion, the radio gave nothing but that soft background static, almost like breath too low to register. Jones, my driver, tapped the dash and said maybe the antenna was loose again. I checked it myself. Tight connection, no fault. The noise wasn't interference. It was a tone, faint, pulsing beneath the frequency. The rain thickened until the world shrank to the glow of taillights. We rolled out slow, engines echoing between the hills. Red clay fanned behind the tires, the road carving a narrow path through ghosted plantations the French had left decades earlier. The smell of rot mixed with diesel. Old bamboo stakes jutted from the mud. What I thought were boundary markers, though later I'd learned they traced where the creek had shifted its bed. By mid-morning, the rain lightened, just enough to see the outline of a collapsed checkpoint half swallowed by vines. The sign carried a faint emblem, French engineers again. Their forgotten works still threaded under our own. Culverts, bridges, drainage paths that never made it onto American maps. The younger drivers played cards on their dashboards when we stopped for a fuel check. I stayed outside, eyes on the fog. I wanted to see the ridgeline, to prove there was still something solid ahead of us. When the turnoff came into view, the road didn't look right. Too narrow for cargo trucks, no sign of tracks, only the rain carving tiny rivers down the slope. Jones asked if we were lost. No, I said, pointing to a leaning stake marked with the last trace of white paint. This is it. The letters were long gone, but the angle matched the contour line on my sheet. I ordered the column to slow to 15 and maintain 50-yard spacing. We'd cross Black Creek before noon and hit Dak To by 2. That was the plan. Then came the hum. It started near the next bend, barely audible under the static, a low vibration that rose and fell like breathing through metal. I assumed the whip antenna was brushing the canopy, but every time the creek came into sight through the fog, the sound grew stronger. I jotted a note on my clipboard, signal distortion, and kept moving. The fog hung in waves, lifting and falling, like the jungle itself exhaling. The smell changed too. It wasn't just wet soil and fuel anymore. It carried something sharper, like scorched wood laced with spoiled meat. I checked the manifest. Every drum sealed, every crate intact, nothing leaking, nothing that should smell like that. The men stayed quiet. You don't waste words in weather like that. Each face half shattered, watching the faint red glows ahead vanish, reappear, vanish again. I measured distance by the tick of my watch because the mile markers were long gone under the floodwash. Then the road began to drop sharper than the contour allowed. Drainage ditches on either side had overfilled, running black as tar. I radioed for tighter spacing. Static flared, cleared for half a heartbeat, then something spoke. One word, blurred and low, not English. Could have been French, could have been nothing human. The hiss swallowed it before I could answer. We rolled on. The odometer needle trembled with each washout. The smell of metal grew stronger, almost electric. Bamboo along the roadside tapped together an uneven rhythm. 3 knocks, Pause. 3 again. I told myself it was wind. By the time we broke into the clearing near the creek, fog draped everything in gray. That quiet before impact. The men felt it too. Black Creek ran wide and sludgic between 2 ridges, steam coiling from its surface. Near the banks it moved slow, but in the middle it quickened, dragging branches under. The old bridge was gone, only 2 broken pylons leaning at wrong angles. Someone had laid planks across for temporary crossing, too thin for a convoy. The rain eased, but the air grew heavier. We waited at the edge of that fog, like men standing on the rim of a dream they didn't ask to see. The radio still whispered with that same low pulse, almost like it was breathing through the wires. But the sound underneath it had changed. It wasn't just hum anymore. It was layered, faint metallic undertones rising and falling, like engines turning far below the creek bed. I gave the order to hold formation, then told Corporal Dean and Private Ellis to gear up. They'd scout the east bank on foot, follow it a quarter-mile downstream, and check for any sign of the missing trucks. Their figures faded into the haze within 10 steps, rifles low, shoulders hunched against the mist that seemed to thicken around them. I marked their departure in the log, 13:10 hours, then turned back to the column. The men watched me, eyes wide but waiting for structure, for something normal to keep them anchored. I told Jones to keep 1 gun truck idling for radio power and ordered the rest to shut down. As soon as the last engine died, the world turned quiet in a way that didn't feel natural. The air was heavy and wet. Sound didn't travel far. I could hear rain hitting leaves but not the creek itself, like the water had stopped moving. The men started murmuring theories: sinkhole, bad bridge, ambush. I didn't correct them. Truth was, I didn't have one answer that made sense. At 13:40, Dean's voice crackled faintly over the handset. He said they'd found tire marks in the mud about 200 meters ahead, but the tracks ended clean at the edge of gravel. No skid, no drag, just vanished. His voice was steady, but I could hear the breath tightening, like he was speaking through a mask. Then the line cut. I tried again, nothing. Jones adjusted the antenna, but the only reply was the hum, twice as strong as before, vibrating through the truck's frame and into our boots. The men looked to me for direction. I told them to form a defensive perimeter, guns low, safeties on. We spread the trucks in a staggered line along the slope, 50 yards between front and rear. The fog pressed close, shifting like something alive, rippling with faint gray movements that looked like water seen through glass. I scanned the far bank through binoculars. The bamboo there swayed without wind, knocking that same 3-beat rhythm. Tap, 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 pause, tap, tap, tap. Always even, never random. When it stopped, the silence hit harder than the sound. Then came the flare, one single white flash low to the ground upstream, too weak to reach height, and gone before the light faded. Could have been Dean's, could have been anything. No follow-up signal. I logged it anyway. The men watched the river like it might reach for them. Jones leaned out of the turret, scanning through fog that swallowed the beam of his flashlight within a few feet. I checked my watch, 13:58. The daylight already felt old, bleached out by the clouds. I couldn't wait any longer. I told Jones to bring the lead gun truck forward. We moved slow, the tires sliding in the clay, water sucking at the treads. The hum in the radio climbed with every yard closer to the creek. I could feel it in my jaw, a vibration deep in the teeth. At the water's edge, I stood through the turret ring, scanning the surface. The fog had lifted just enough to show dark shapes midstream, round, low, half-sunken. I thought they were rocks until the current shifted, and I caught a glint of metal, curved and pale under the surface. It could have been the side of a truck bed or something worse. I waved for Jones to hold position and stepped down into the water. It hit like ice, numbing quick, the mud sucking at my boots. The bottom dropped sudden after a few steps, no slope, just clean, vertical drop-off. That wasn't natural. I froze there, feeling the current twist around my legs like something testing for weakness. Then I heard it, a faint, drawn-out groan from under the surface, the sound of metal bending under pressure. I backed out, slow and careful, until I was clear of the waterline. I ordered Jones to reverse to higher ground. The tires spun, caught, and we climbed back up the bank. Ripples spread from the same spot I'd been standing, circling twice before disappearing. The creek smoothed over again, black and still. I tried the radio, switching frequencies, calling for Dean. Only that endless hum answered, the same rhythm, steady and patient. The men were restless now. One driver crossed himself. Another muttered that the fog was getting thicker. I couldn't argue. It was building again, seeping from the creek like breath from a lung. I made the decision to wait until daylight. though the sun hadn't fully set. I told them to park the trucks in a half circle on higher ground, gun trucks at both ends. We'd hold position until the fog lifted enough to move. No one complained. They were too tired for that. We set out perimeter lights, though the mist swallowed their glow almost instantly, turning them into pale orbs floating a few feet above the mud. Jones brewed coffee on the tailgate stove. It smelled burnt, tasted worse, but it kept hands busy and minds grounded. I took one cup and walked down to the creek again. Couldn't help it. The smell hit stronger there. Sweet rot mixed with hot metal. The surface rippled though the air was dead still. I crouched low, reached out and touched the water. It was warm. Not just warmer than the rain, warm like blood. Something brushed against my boot, soft and deliberate. I jerked my leg back, light flashing across the surface, but nothing showed. Just faint oil rainbows sliding over black current. I backed off, leaving a clear footprint in mud, and wrote one line in my notebook. Creek temperature inconsistent. Movement below surface. By nightfall, visibility was down to 10 yards. The jungle sounds had died completely. No frogs, no crickets, no night birds, just the steady knock of bamboo from across the water. The 3-beat rhythm repeating like a code. I walked a perimeter, checking each guard post. The men kept rifles low but eyes higher, like they expected the fog itself to move. Jones sat by the gun truck, eyes half shut from exhaustion, the radio still whispering behind him. "You hear that?" he asked. I listened, nothing but static, until he turned the dial down. That's when I realized the hum was still there even with the set-off. It wasn't coming from the radio, it was coming through the ground. Around midnight, a tremor rolled through the soil, gentle first, then harder, like something large shifting under the riverbed. One of the drivers swore he heard engines turning beneath the water, slow and distant. I wanted to tell him he was wrong, but I wasn't sure myself. Jones looked pale in the light, his breath visible in air that should have been warm. He said the hum was pulsing now, like a heartbeat. 3 short bursts, 1 pause, 3 again. I didn't have an answer for that either. At 0200, the fog flashed from beneath, white, silent, blinding for an instant. The ground vibrated hard enough to rattle the truck frames. The men jumped to weapons, safeties off, barrels aimed toward the creek. The glow died as fast as it came. We waited, hearts pounding. Nothing followed. I counted heads, Dean and Ellis still gone. I keyed the mic anyway. Voice low, "Scout team, report." For a few seconds only static. Then came a whisper, not words, just a breath that carried through the line. Too human to be interference, too faint to locate. The sound cut, and the hum returned, louder, closer, like it was right beneath us. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. Instead, I wrote every detail in the log. 025, ground vibration. 0315, light under creek. 0410, no visual movement. Each note steadied my hands even as the fog began to thin. By dawn, the water had risen another foot, though no new rain had fallen. The old pylons leaned inward now, closer than before, like something beneath was pushing upward. I stared at the surface long enough to see shapes sliding beneath it, shadows that didn't match the current's flow. When the men stirred, I told them to pack gear and stand by. We were going to find out what that creek was hiding, even if it meant crossing into it ourselves. The morning came pale and cold, the fog rolling low over the creek like breath held too long. The men moved slow, faces drawn, eyes ringed from a night without sleep. I gave short orders to break down perimeter and prep the trucks. The ground had changed overnight, clay gone dark gray and tacky, boots sticking like glue. The air carried that same metallic tang, sharp enough to taste. Jones started the lead gun truck, and the sound of its engine cut through the silence like a heartbeat. I sent Private Hughes to collect ropes, chains, and the spare winch. If the missing trucks were buried in a sinkhole, we'd find them and drag them out before noon. I needed something tangible to focus on, something that could still be explained by physics and mud. But even as I told myself that, I knew the ground beneath us didn't feel right. The soil trembled faintly underfoot, as though the earth itself was waiting. When the fog thinned enough to see the banks, I took Jones and 2 men to the waterline. The creek looked swollen, higher than before, its surface smooth except for a slow spiral turning near the center. Jones scanned with binoculars. "There," he said. I followed his hand and saw a strip of color snagged midstream. Canvas, maybe from a tarp. It drifted loose, twisting on the current before dipping under again. I thought it was from the lead truck, until it surfaced downstream, glistening like something plastic instead of cloth. I ordered the men to anchor a winch to the nearest tree. The cable spooled out slow, the motor whining as the hook vanished under the black water. For a while, nothing happened. Then the line went taut, jerking the truck's chassis forward. The motor whined harder. The men braced. It felt like whatever was down there was pulling back. Hughes hit the release, but the cable didn't slacken. It snapped with a high crack, whipping through the fog, slicing his glove open before vanishing into the current. He went down with a shout, hand bleeding through the fabric. No one moved for several seconds. The bamboo on the far bank began knocking again. 3 beats, louder now. The smell came with it, hot iron and bird oil drifting over the water. The hum rose through the ground until I felt it in my boots, a vibration steady as pulse. I signaled the men to fall back uphill, reform line, guns downrange. We formed a half circle facing the creek, barrels aimed low, safeties off. The ripples moved against the current, pushing upstream instead of down. Then a voice drifted from the fog. It said our unit name, clear, calm, wrong. The tone was too flat, like a recording played through metal. Every man froze. Jones whispered, "That sounded like our own radio operator." I keyed the mic and asked for call sign verification. The response came instantly. Correct identifier, wrong format, a call sign retired months ago. I switched the radio off and told the men to stand by for withdrawal. Whatever was on the other side of that signal wasn't command. We waited for daylight to burn through the fog, but the sun refused to climb. The light that did filter through was thin and colorless, turning everything the shade of steel. By the time it started moving, the creek had risen another inch. The mud near the wheels sucked like wet cement. I ordered engines on, formation tight, guns watching the rear. The first few trucks managed to climb the incline without sinking. When I reached the road bend, I looked back. The water had climbed the bank halfway, already swallowing the prints we'd left minutes before. "We're not staying another hour," I told Jones. "If it wants the rest, it can keep the mud." We rolled north along the ridge, the road cutting between walls of bamboo that leaned overhead like ribs. The fog moved with us, crawling through the trees on both sides. By noon, we stopped to rest the engines. The men ate in silence, chewing like machines. No jokes, no talk, just a sound of rain dripping from the leaves and the steady hiss of cooling metal. I unfolded the map again, trying to align the contour lines with the terrain. That's when I noticed something strange. The printed coordinates for Black Creek didn't match where we were standing. We weren't on the official route at all. Somehow, during the last push through the fog, we had veered a full kilometer off the recorded track. The creek wasn't supposed to run here. I checked the markings twice, and 3 times. The map was clean, no smudges, no errors. It was us that were wrong. Jones leaned over my shoulder. "We're in the wrong valley," he said. His voice was calm, too calm. "There's no record of a spur road here." I folded the map and slipped it into my jacket. "Then we make one." But even as I said it, I could feel the weight of that wrongness settle in my gut. If the creek didn't exist on our maps, neither did our position. No one would find us if the line went dead. At 1300 hours, I gave the order to reposition and search the lower bank. Maybe the missing trucks had washed downstream overnight. We took the lead gun truck back down the slope, Jones driving, me standing through the turret ring. The tires spun, slipped, caught. When we reached the clearing, the fog had thinned just enough to show the 2 old pylons from the French bridge leaning toward each other like hands clasped in prayer. The air smelled of creosote and something chemical. I couldn't tell where the creek ended and the mist began. We edged forward until the water reached the bumper. The current tugged at the wheels, trying to drag us deeper. I told Jones to hold steady while I scanned through the binoculars. Beneath the surface, something shifted. Slow, deliberate, the way a shadow moves when light bends around it. I stepped down into the water again, rope around my waist, the cold biting through to the bone. The current wasn't just moving, it was breathing, pulling and releasing in rhythm. Beneath my boots, I felt stone, but not rough like river rock. Smooth, carved, the kind of precision only engineers could make. "This isn't a creek bed," I said quietly. Jones didn't answer. I crouched, wiped the water aside with my glove, and saw faint lettering carved into what looked like concrete. Ruisseau Noir, French for Black Creek. Below it, smaller text too worn to read. The realization hit like cold fire. We weren't standing above natural ground. This whole stretch was built. An old drainage tunnel system buried decades ago. Maybe sealed, maybe not. I climbed back up the bank, lungs burning from the cold. "It's man-made," I told Jones. "The whole damn creek's built on top of something." He stared at me, expression unreadable. "You think that's what took the trucks?" I nodded. "If the tunnel roof gave way under the weight, it pulled them straight through." It was the only logical answer left. But logic didn't explain the hum, or the lights, or why the radio carried voices that shouldn't exist. We winched the line again, Careful this time, easing it under the surface where the lettering disappeared. The hook clanged against something hard. Jones revved the motor. The cable drew tight, vibrating with tension. The chain started to rise, water boiling around it. Then a metallic thud echoed from beneath, something massive shifting in the dark. The chain jerked, the winch groaned, and a shape broke the surface. A tailgate, black with silt, numbers barely visible. One of ours. The men shouted, relief flashing for half a heartbeat, until they saw what was attached. The metal looked pitted, corroded, as if it had been underwater for years, not one night. The hinges hung loose, edges warped and soft. The moment the chain slackened, the current seized it back. The tailgate slid under again without a sound. The air thickened at once, pressing like weight on the chest. The hum rose, louder than before, shaking the trucks. The bamboo began its knocking again. No rhythm now, just frantic, uneven strikes echoing through fog. I shouted for everyone to fall back, but the sound of my voice seemed swallowed. Even as I turned, the water rippled, parting in slow, deliberate waves that moved upstream. I grabbed Jones' shoulder. Start the engine. He slammed the ignition. The motor coughed once, then caught. The headlights flickered across the mist. For a brief second, I thought I saw a shape in the water, a curve of metal, smooth, enormous, rising beneath the surface. Then it sank again, leaving the creek black and still. Jones looked at me, face pale as the fog. "Whatever's down there," he said quietly, "it's not done yet." I didn't answer. I just logged the time, 14:47, and wrote one last line for the day. Creek shifting, substructure unstable, recommend withdrawal. But we both knew we wouldn't get to leave that easily. By late afternoon, the light dimmed into that gray no man's hour where the world feels half remembered, neither day nor night. The fog had settled again, thicker than before, coiling through the valley like it owned the place. The men moved quiet, worn to bone. Every sound, every metallic click, every breath, amplified by the air's stillness. We set a small camp on higher ground above the creek, the trucks drawn into a horseshoe with gun mounts facing the water. I walked the line, checking posts, boots dragging through clay that squelched like wet leather. Jones was brewing coffee again on the tailgate stove, the smell bitter enough to keep us awake. I knelt beside him, flipping open my notebook. The last entry from that morning stared back. Creek shifting, substructure unstable. The ink had bled from moisture. Words ghosted like they wanted to vanish too. When the light began to fail, I went back down to the ford. The fog moved with a rhythm now, pulsing in and out like something breathing under it. The water looked calm at a glance, but every few seconds it rippled from the center outward, steady, measured, alive. I crouched low, just above the bank, and let my fingers graze the current. Warm again, that same feverish heat. I pulled back quick, wiped my hand on my sleeve, and scanned the far side. The bamboo there, swayed though no wind touched it, clacking in that 3-beat pattern. Tap, 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 tap. Always the same, always waiting. Back at camp, the men had fallen into their silence, the kind that comes when words stop making sense. A few checked weapons, more out of habit than hope. I told Jones to run a comm check, just once more, though I already knew what he'd find. The radio hissed alive with static, then that same low hum, pulsing slow through the speaker. It wasn't feedback, it was intention. Jones turned the dial down. The sound didn't fade, it sank into the ground. "It's not the set," he said quietly. I nodded. "Then we're hearing it because it wants to be heard." He looked at me like I'd said something dangerous, but didn't argue. Sometime near dusk, the ground under our boots trembled. Not much, just enough to rattle the canteen cups and make the trucks creak on their suspensions. One of the drivers swore he felt pressure in his chest, like the air itself was pushing back. Then the hum shifted pitch, deeper now, slower, more deliberate. The men froze. I heard a metallic scrape from down by the creek, followed by the soft knot of bamboo, no longer in threes but uneven, like it had lost its rhythm. Jones raised his weapon toward the noise, but I lowered it. "Hold fire," I said. "We don't shoot ghosts." At 1900, the fog flashed white from underneath, like lightning seen through water. It wasn't bright enough to blind, but it carried a shape, something circular, rotating slow beneath the surface. The flash faded, leaving the after image burned into my sight, a ring of light beneath the creek, big as a truck bed, then gone. The men muttered, some praying, others cursing softly into their sleeves. I took a breath that tasted like metal and ozone. We'd been through firefights, ambushes, airstrikes, but nothing felt like this. This wasn't fear from outside. It was something pressing inward, crawling through the ribs and settling behind the heart. At 2,000 hours, I heard the radio crackle again, faint and strained. Dean to command. Below, then silence. I grabbed the handset, shouting back his name, calling coordinates, any sign he was alive. The static hissed, and then that hum returned, louder than before. Not through the speaker, through the air itself. The ground vibrated under the trucks, frames trembling. The bamboo clattered so hard, it sounded like gunfire. I ordered all engines on, lights facing the Ford. The headlights cut through the fog in narrow cones, illuminating the water that now seemed to boil from underneath. For a heartbeat, I saw a shape rise, metallic, half round, glinting beneath the surface like a truck hood, then sink before we could blink. Mount up, I shouted. The men scrambled, boots slipping in the muck. Jones fired the engine on the gun truck, gears whining as the wheels spun for traction. The winch line still hung from the last attempt, its hook half buried in mud. The moment the motor turned, the cable went rigid, pulled tight as if something below had taken hold again. Jones tried to reverse, the truck lurched forward instead. I hit the emergency brake and cut the engine. The cable went slack, then sank under the water, leaving a trail of bubbles. Hughes, his bandaged hand trembling, muttered that it was breathing again. I didn't correct him. The smell hit next, stronger than before, burning the back of the throat. Creosote, rot, and something chemical, sharp like paint thinner. I could taste it on my tongue. The fog glowed faint yellow now, light bleeding through from below. I raised binoculars, but the lenses fogged over instantly. When I wiped them, I saw it. The old French pylons leaning closer than before, their bases trembling. For a second I thought they were about to collapse. Then I realized they were rising. Stone pushing up through clay like bones surfacing after rain. Back to the ridge, I shouted. The men hesitated only a moment before hauling equipment and wounded into the remaining trucks. Jones gunned the engine, and we tore up the slope. Tires flooded. The umbrella of the creek began to churn, dark water folding inward on itself. The sound that followed wasn't thunder or machinery. It was metal twisting under strain, drawn out, hollow, deep enough to rattle teeth. I risked a glance back. The entire Ford was collapsing in slow motion, the banks caving toward the center as if the ground had opened its mouth. When we reached the ridge, the fog below pulsed like the glow of a dying furnace. The men stood there, panting, staring down at the valley where the creek had been. In its place lay a depression filled with swirling black water. No wreckage floated up, no debris, no proof that any trucks had ever gone down there. Only that slow circular motion continuing at the center. The same pattern as before. 3 turns, pause, 3 again. I keyed the mic and reached battalion frequency. For a second static, then a voice came through. Calm, formal, not one I recognized. Convoy, confirmed cargo secure. The words froze me. They were my own, recorded from my log entry the previous day, replayed in the same rhythm, same inflection. I shut the set off. Jones looked at me, waiting for orders. I could only manage one. We hold till daylight, then we leave. The fog rose again, climbing the ridge. The men backed toward the trucks, weapons half raised, eyes darting to every sound. Somewhere below, the bamboo started its rhythm anew. 3 knocks, perfectly timed. Tap, 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 tap. The pattern didn't fade. It just kept repeating, like a code that would never finish. I stood there a long while, staring into that gray emptiness, the hum still crawling through my boots, through the steel of the truck, through my bones. The night swallowed everything except the sound of that unseen rhythm, echoing through a valley that no longer belonged to us. Dawn broke pale and colorless, the sky washed in that lifeless gray that always follows a storm but promises none of its peace. The fog hadn't left, it only shifted, stretched thin enough to show the valley below like a faded photograph. From the ridge, we could see what used to be Black Creek, a long wound of black water snaking between slopes, rippling where the current shouldn't have moved. Nothing floated, not a crate, not a splinter of wood, not the smallest sign of the trucks that had gone under. The men gathered by the edge, silent, each staring down as though expecting something to rise. Jones leaned on the hood beside me, eyes sunk deep. "You still think that was a sinkhole?" he asked. I wanted to say yes. Instead, I told him to help me rig the winch again. If there was any wreckage left to pull, we'd find it. The weight of command doesn't allow superstition, it demands action. Even when the ground itself feels wrong beneath your boots. The mud had changed overnight, darker now, clinging like tar. When I stepped into it, I felt a pulse travel up my leg. Not vibration, but rhythm. I froze, counted it out. 3 beats, pause, 3 again. The same pattern, the same damned pulse. Jones noticed it too. It's like the earth's breathing, he said. I told him to keep working. We dropped the hook at the point where the creek's color deepened, the same place the tailgate had surfaced. The cable rattled as it fed out, disappearing into the water's black skin. For a minute, nothing. Then the winch motor strained, gears whining, chain trembling as if hooked on something buried deep. Jones throttled the engine. The line went tight. Slowly, painfully, the cable began to move. Bubbles rose to the surface, wide and oily, bursting with that sharp chemical stench that made every man on the bank cover his mouth. The water turned the color of old ink. Then, metal. A shape broke through. A hood, rusted and warped. Headlights blown out. The grille bent clean in half. The men shouted, half relief, half disbelief. One of ours. I climbed down to the bank, boots sinking halfway to the ankle. The metal shimmered wet, slick with residue, like melted wax. I brushed my glove along the surface and felt it give slightly, as if soft beneath the paint. The air thickened. The hum returned, not through the ground this time, but from the truck itself, resonating through its frame like the echo of a live wire. Jones shouted that the line was slitting. I told him to hold. The winch whined, engine screaming. The truck's rear lifted an inch, maybe two, then froze. The water beneath it began to boil. Steam rose in sheets, hissing, carrying that same bitter stench of creosote and bleach. The noise built to a pressure that made my teeth ache. Then, without warning, every sound died. The hum cut off. The silence hit hard, so complete it felt like the world had stopped breathing. And then, the ground struck back. A single thud, deep and final, rolled beneath our boots, shaking the trucks. The water folded inward, swallowing the wreck as though it had never existed. The cable snapped, whipping through the mud with a scream. One of the drivers, Santiago, went down clutching his leg, blood dark against the red clay. Jones dragged him behind cover. I just stood there, staring at the hollow where the hood had been seconds earlier. Nothing but ripples now, small and perfect. The radio in the gun truck clicked on by itself. Convoy report, a voice said, calm, unhurried. Cargo secured. I grabbed a handset. Identify yourself. Static. Then the sound of breathing, slow and steady, matching the rhythm under our feet. I dropped the mic. Jones's face had gone white. Sir, he said, voice tight, we need to get the hell out. I didn't argue. I gave the order to move. The men packed fast, dragging the wounded into the trucks, engines roaring to life in a chorus that broke the spell. The fog was closing again, curling up the slopes like smoke. The bamboo knocked in rhythm, louder now, like it was answering the hum. I led the convoy uphill, the tires spinning for traction, mud grabbing at the treads. Halfway up the grade, the rear gun truck opened fire, short controlled bursts. I turned just in time to see tracers vanish into fog. Cease fire, I shouted over the radio. No response, only the rattle of distant gunfire, then nothing. The fog glowed faintly orange below, pulsing like light seen through glass. Jones shouted, headlights! Down by the creek, two beams burned through the mist. Low, circular, moving slow toward the bank. They looked like eyes, rising from the water, steady, unblinking. That's one of ours, Jones whispered. I stared until I saw it too. The outline of a cargo truck, half submerged, engine idling in silence. Same unit number painted on the door. The same truck we'd watched disappear yesterday. Its headlights flickered once, then held steady. The door hung open. I called over the radio, voice shaking despite myself. Identify. Driver, respond. Nothing. The truck didn't move, didn't sink, didn't die. Just stayed there, watching us with those dead lights. The men waited for me to give the order to fire, but I didn't. Instead, I said, we keep moving. Because deep down, I knew the moment we acknowledged it, the thing would start towards us. We drove until the fog swallowed the headlights, until even the knocking faded. Only when the sound was gone did I let myself look back. The valley below glowed faintly in the dawn haze, one pale circle where the creek should have been. I didn't need to see the rest to know it was still breathing. Black Creek hadn't drowned our trucks. It had taken them. We reached the main ridge by late morning, engines coughing smoke, tires coated in a skin of red clay that refused to let go. The rain returned in thin sheets, just enough to smear the windshield into streaks. Nobody spoke. The men sat hollow-eyed, staring ahead as if conversation might bring the fog back. I ordered a halt so the wounded could be checked. Santiago's leg was torn open where the cable had snapped, but he was alive, white as ash, eyes glassed over like he'd seen something none of us could name. Jones tore a strip from his own sleeve to tighten the tourniquet. We can't go back through that valley, he said quietly, even if command orders it. I didn't answer, because there was nothing left to argue. We both knew the truth. Whatever that place was, it wasn't finished with us yet. When I tried the radio again, I caught static, then a faint signal. Our call sign repeated twice. Then the voice of Operations Center at Pleiku. Convoy, report position. I gave coordinates, said we'd lost 2 trucks, 1 wounded, and mission incomplete. There was a pause, too long. Then another voice replaced the first, smoother, colder. Extraction detail en route. Extraction detail en route. Then the line went dead. Jones frowned. Extraction. Jones frowned. We didn't call for that. I checked the handset, power light still solid green. I didn't either, I said. The men heard it too. Extraction meant something had gone wrong at a level above ours. Something they didn't want left in the open. Down in the valley, the fog started to crawl back uphill, thick and patient. The bamboo's knocking had returned, soft, methodical. The same 3-beat rhythm that had haunted us since the crossing. Tap, 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 tap. I ordered the men into defensive spread, weapons ready. The sound grew louder, closer, until it seemed to come from under the ground itself. The wounded man stirred, muttering through clenched teeth, saying he could still hear the rear gun truck firing somewhere below, beneath the earth. It's not the truck, I told him, just the echo. But the words felt false the moment I said them. The ground shivered again, a long, low vibration that made the trucks creak. Then it passed. The fog paused at the slope, hanging there like a tide stopped by an invisible wall. For a moment, I thought maybe it was over. Then a deep hum rolled through the valley, soft, rhythmic, deliberate, as if answering the bamboo's knock. Jones looked at me, jaw tight. We can't stay here. He was right. We move north, I said, unfolding the map on the hood. The paper was wet, smudged, half useless, but one route still showed, the old French road cutting through the ridge, connecting to Route 544. It would take us clear of the valley. We follow this line, I said. No stops, no radios unless it's command frequency. Engines roared back to life. The convoy rolled out, metal grinding against the slope, wheels fighting mud that wanted to swallow them whole. The fog chased us, sliding between trees, curling around trunks like smoke through wreckage. The bamboo thinned as we climbed higher, but the sound didn't fade. It just shifted direction, always staying ahead of us. The forest grew darker, the canopy pressing close. The road split at an unmarked junction. One path sloped upward toward dry ground. The other dipped toward another band of mist. The map showed only one road, not 2. Jones waited for my call. I didn't need long. High road, I said. He nodded, steering left. We'd barely made it 50 yards before headlights appeared through the fog ahead. 2 beams, steady and low, cutting through the trees. They were moving toward us, slow and silent. Jones braked hard, mud splattering across the windshield. The men jumped from their trucks, rifles drawn. The lights kept coming, bright but soundless. The outline behind them shaping into a familiar box frame, a cargo truck. I lifted my binoculars. The stenciled number on the door matched ours. Same dented fender, same rust mark along the hood. It can't be, Jones whispered. That one's gone. The truck rolled closer, engine still silent, water dripping from its frame. I called through the radio, demanding identification. No response. Hold fire, I ordered, stepping forward a few paces. The mud clung to my boots, dragging heavy. The closer it came, the clearer I saw. Windshield shattered, cab empty, but headlights burning bright as eyes. It stopped 30 yards away. The door on the driver's side swung open with a slow, metallic groan. Inside, something moved, a flicker of shape, almost human but not. My hand went to my rifle. "Who's in there?" I shouted. No answer, just the hum, faint at first, then swelling again beneath our feet, pulsing in time with the engine that wasn't running. I reached the bumper, every instinct screaming to turn back, but command and curiosity have their own gravity. The keys still hung in the ignition, metal glistening wet. When I grabbed the handle and pulled the door wider, a flood of clear water poured out, steaming in the morning air. Jones yelled for me to step away. I did, slipping back into the mud as the truck's engine roared to life by itself, gears grinding, wheels spinning in place. The door slammed shut so hard it shook the mares loose. The headlights flared white, blinding. The men opened fire, controlled bursts into the hood. Sparks flew, but the truck didn't stop. It rolled backward into the fog, slow, deliberate, vanishing like it had never been there. The sound of the engine faded into nothing, replaced by that same steady hum vibrating through the trees. We stood there, drenched and shaking. No one spoke. I climbed back into the lead truck and gave the only order that made sense. "We're done. Move out." The men obeyed without question. We drove uphill, engines growling, fog thinning behind us. By the time we reached the upper ridge, the sky cracked open with sunlight for the first time in days. The light felt wrong, too bright, too clean against the memory of what we'd left behind. Down below, the valley still smoldered with fog, turning slow circles over the place where the creek had been. Jones kept his eyes on the road, hands tight on the wheel. "Sir," he said softly, "what do we tell them?" I looked back once, watching the valley shrink behind the trees. "We tell them the truth," I said, "and hope they don't already know it." We reached the forward base near Dak To just after nightfall. Engines coughing, frames shuddering from the climb. Every surface was coated in mud, metal, boots, skin, the color of old blood turned dull by rain. The guards at the checkpoint didn't even question us. They just waved the convoy through when they saw how few trucks remained. 6 cargo, 1 gun, and men who looked more ghost than human. No one spoke as we parked. The wounded were taken straight to the med tent. The rest sat in silence, heads bowed, listening to the storm gather behind us. I walked along toward the operations shack, my boots slapping wet against the concrete. Inside, 2 officers waited, clean uniforms, polished boots, faces that hadn't seen field weather in weeks. They didn't ask how many men we'd lost, just from my logbook. I read from it word for word: missing vehicles, unstable crossing, coordinates, unknown cause. When I finished, the taller one asked if I had written authorization for the route. I told him it came by radio. He nodded once, said nothing, and took the book. They told me to wait outside. Rain pattered on the tin roof while I stood there under the awning, counting the seconds. An hour later, they called me back in. The logbook was gone. They said my report would be typed later, that I could rejoin my unit. The simple lead effect had broken it. It seems to be pulling off and dias. Someone had written our ending before we'd even crossed that creek. The men stayed 2 days at base for refit. None slept much. They said the rain outside sounded wrong, like breathing through steel. One claimed you could hear engines idling somewhere in the hills at night, though no patrols were scheduled. Another woke shouting that headlights were moving underwater, slow and silent. I didn't tell them I'd heard the same hum through the generator line every time the lights flickered. On the 3rd day, a major from S2 called me to Pleiku for debrief. He asked detailed questions: cargo weights, crate numbers, markings. Not once did he ask about the men who vanished. When I brought up the French map I'd found, he stopped writing. He said there was no record of any drainage system in that region, no tunnels, no Black Creek route. Then he slid a new operations map across the desk. The spur road was gone, just blank terrain. "You've been reassigned," he said, closing his folder. Half the crew was scattered to other convoys within a week. Jones and I stayed with the same truck, though maintenance tagged it for salvage. The frame twisted, engine leaking oil like blood. I wouldn't trade it. It was the only piece left that felt real. Before we shipped out again, I went to supply for new maps. The clerk, an engineer sergeant, handed me the folder without a word. When I flipped through it later, a single scrap of paper fell out, yellowed, edges burned, handwriting in pencil. At the top was one French word, "Oui sommes." Beneath it, scrawled smaller, "Do not open the ground." I kept it folded in my pocket ever since. 2 weeks later, I volunteered to ride with an engineering detail, assigned to clear debris along the same corridor. Officially, it was for survey work. Truth was, I needed to see the place again, to convince myself it was still there. We left Pleiku at dawn, 3 trucks, light gear, no radio chatter. The road was half erased by rain. By the time we reached the valley, I barely recognized it. The bamboo had been cut back, stakes planted where the ford used to be. The creek itself ran lower now, calm and narrow, sunlight glinting off it like glass. The engineers said a landslide upstream had changed the flow. They joked that maybe we'd find the missing trucks high and dry, but the bed was smooth, too smooth. No wreckage, no debris, not even scrap, just pale gravel from bank to bank. I walked to the same spot where the tailgate had surfaced. The mud was firmer, dry enough to hold shape under my boot. When I knelt and touched the water, it was warm again, same as before. One of the engineers called me over. He'd found rebar jutting from the bank. We dug around it and uncovered a slab of concrete shaped like an arch. Old, gray, unmistakably French. He said we should blow it, seal the culvert, but as he set the wire, the ground trembled, soft, steady, rhythmic. The creek rippled in perfect intervals, like a slow heartbeat. None of us spoke. The lead engineer watched the water for a long moment, then quietly packed the detonators away. "We'll call it finished," he said. let it stay closed. I didn't argue. On the ride back, rain followed us all the way to the main road. The fog rose behind, folding the valley from sight. That night, I filed the final report. Creek stable, no recoverable equipment, no structural hazard. It went straight into a folder no one would open twice. Days later, Jones was transferred south. Before he left, he slipped a note into my toolbox. If they ever send another run up that way, burn the orders. Months turned into years, and the war moved on. But every wet season, the same rumor surfaced. Convoys taking long turns near Dak To, units vanishing in fog, always in the rain, always near a creek that didn't appear on any new map. When I looked at satellite prints decades later, the valley was still there, a scar of darker soil where the road once ran. Right at the center sat a circular patch of ground smooth as glass. I remembered the whirlpool, the hum, the way the water folded inward like breath being drawn. They say nature reclaims everything. Maybe that's true, but Black Creek never returned what it took. Now, when storms come, I still hear that pulse beneath the thunder. 3 beats, pause, 3 again. Sometimes I dream of the truck still down there, engines turning slow in the dark, headlights glowing faint under the mud. Maybe it's memory, maybe it's warning. All I know is this: no man should be ordered where the maps end and the water runs black. And if anyone ever finds that place again, tell them what we learned too late. Do not open the ground. That valley was erased from every map before the ink on our reports had even dried. But the men who went missing at Black Creek, Dean, Ellis, the others, never left it. Some nights, when the storm rolls in and the power lines start to hum, I swear I can still hear the engines down there turning slow beneath the mud. If you ever find yourself driving through the Central Highlands and the road ahead disappears into fog, stop, turn around. Some places were sealed for a reason. If you made it this far, you already know. These stories aren't just legends, they're warnings. Hit subscribe, share this transmission, and keep your radio on the low band. Captain Rebel's always listening, and there are more files coming, declassified, unfiltered, and buried for a reason. Stay sharp out there.